When little Elle Bennett, just 7 years old, lost her mother to cancer, her small, fragile world was shattered into fragments she believed could never be pieced back together. But during the somber Suber funeral service, Johnny Depp made an unexpected appearance, carrying with him a pirate chest and a plan to change this young girl's life forever. Stay tuned until the end to discover how this heart-wrenching story unfolds. This is one you won't want to miss. The cold, gray morning wrapped the cemetery in a heavy shroud, casting a somber gloom over the rows of silent gravestones. Standing motionless beside a polished mahogany casket, 7-year-old Elle Bennett seemed lost and fragile in a black mourning dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her wide, sorrowful eyes were fixed on the casket poised above an open grave, its descent into the earth marking an irreversible goodbye. A gentle breeze rustled through the nearby trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and freshly turned earth. Elle shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. Inside that beautiful wooden box lay her mother, Sharon Bennett, forever beyond her reach. Just a few feet away, a newly placed marble tombstone stood as a stark reminder of why they were there. Elle's gaze was drawn to it, her young eyes absorbing the crisp engraving of her mother's name and the photograph fixed to its surface. The image was how Elle remembered her mother best, a smiling woman in a blue floral dress, her eyes radiating warmth and love. The contrast between that vibrant memory and the cold reality of the casket was almost unbearable for the little girl. The gathering at the funeral was notably small, reflecting the family's modest means and quiet life. Besides Elle, only her grandmother, Agnes Bennett, a solemn-faced priest, and 3 funeral staff were present. They stood in a loose semicircle around the grave, their silence interrupted only by the occasional sniffle or the rustling of fabric. As the funeral staff prepared to lower the casket, Elle felt an overwhelming urge to speak. She stepped forward hesitantly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't help you, Mommy." Her words caught in her throat, nearly dissolving into sobs. Agnes, sensing her granddaughter's distress, quickly embraced her. "Sho, darling," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother is in a better place now. She's not hurting anymore." Elle leaned into her grandmother, finding solace in the familiar scent of lavender that clung to Agnes's clothes. She wanted desperately to believe those comforting words, to imagine her mother free of pain and at peace. But the ache in her chest reminded her that while her mother might be at rest, those left behind were still hurting. The priest, a kind-faced man with graying hair, cleared his throat gently. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his compassionate tone softening the harshness of the moment. Agnes gave a small nod, gently squeezing Elle's shoulders before releasing her. The small group drew closer as the priest opened his prayer book and began to speak. "We are gathered here today to commit Sharon Bennett to her eternal rest," he intoned, his voice carrying across the still cemetery. "Though her time with us was cut short, we remember the love she shared, the lives she touched, and the legacy she leaves behind." Elle's gaze drifted back to her mother's photograph on the tombstone. She struggled to reconcile the vibrant, smiling woman in the picture with the still, lifeless form in the casket. It seemed impossible that someone so full of life could simply be gone. As the priest's prayer continued, the breeze picked up, rustling the trees and carrying a soft whisper that almost sounded like her mother's voice. Elle closed her eyes, imagining for a fleeting moment that her mother was there, wrapping her in a warm embrace and assuring her that everything would be okay. The priest spoke of hope and resurrection, of a life beyond death. Elle wondered if her mother could hear his words, if she was watching from somewhere above the gray sky. She hoped so, hoped her mother knew how deeply she was loved and already missed. As the prayer concluded, the funeral staff moved into position to lower the casket. Elle's heart raced. This was it, the final goodbye. Once the casket was lowered into the earth, it would be real, final, irrevocable. She wanted to cry out, to beg for just one more moment with her mother. But the words remained trapped behind the immense wall of grief in her chest. Agnes, sensing her granddaughter's turmoil, placed a comforting hand on Elle's shoulder. "It's okay to cry, sweetheart," she whispered. "Your mother would understand." Elle nodded, her first tears spilling over her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away, letting them fall freely as a testament to her love and loss. As the priest's final blessing faded into the still morning air, silence blanketed the small gathering. Then, something unexpected happened, something that would change the course of the day and the lives of those present. The funeral staff began whispering among themselves, their eyes fixed on a point beyond the grave. Confusion and disbelief etched their faces. Elle turned to look, curiosity piercing through her grief. Approaching them was a man dressed in a sharp black suit, his outfit oddly complemented by a Captain Jack Sparrow pirate hat perched atop his head. As he drew closer, recognition struck Elle. It wasn't just any man in a pirate hat, it was Johnny Depp. "The locket," she murmured softly, lifting it with care from the chest. "Mommy used to wear this all the time." Johnny nodded, his smile gentle. "That's right," he affirmed. "And now it's yours, if you'd like to keep it." Ella held the locket tightly against her chest, feeling as though she were cradling a piece of her mother close to her heart. Her eyes drifted to the wedding rings, and a small frown formed on her face. "These were Mommy and Daddy's," she said in a quiet voice. "But shouldn't they stay with Mommy?" Johnny's eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed by the little girl's thoughtful words. "That's a very kind thought, Ella," he said. "What do you think we should do?" Ella thought for a moment, her young face serious, with concentration. After a pause, she looked up at Johnny and Agnes. "I want to keep the locket," she declared with determination, "and the journal. But can we put the rings with Mommy? So she can have them forever?" Agnes felt tears rise to her eyes at her granddaughter's heartfelt words. Kneeling beside Ella, she wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Johnny nodded in agreement. "A perfect choice," he said, carefully closing the chest, which now held only the wedding rings. He turned to the funeral personnel, who had been watching with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Would it be possible," Johnny asked, "to place this with Sharon?" One of the funeral workers stepped forward, nodding respectfully. "Of course, sir. We can arrange that right away." The chest was gently placed alongside the casket, ready for its final descent. The priest cleared his throat and asked softly, "Shall we continue with the service?" Johnny stepped back, joining the small circle around the grave.
"Please," he said.
"And my apologies for the interruption. Please carry on." As the priest resumed his comforting words, Ella stood between her grandmother and Johnny Depp, clutching the locket in one hand and the journal in the other. The presence of the Hollywood actor added a surreal quality to the intimate ceremony, as if the lines between reality and fantasy had briefly blurred. Ella listened quietly as the casket was lowered into the earth, the priest's words of solace filling the air. Her young mind struggled to grasp the enormity of the moment, but she understood love and memory. Holding the locket and journal close, she felt a connection to her mother that transcended death. When it was time for the final ritual, the funeral personnel handed over the shovel for the ceremonial closing of the grave. Agnes stepped forward first, her hands trembling slightly as she scooped a small amount of earth and let it fall onto the casket. Johnny followed, his actions solemn and respectful, despite never having known Sharon in life. The soft thud of earth against the casket echoed faintly in the quiet cemetery. Finally, it was Ella's turn. Agnes knelt beside her, and together they grasped the shovel. Ella's small hands, dwarfed by her grandmother's, held tightly as they lifted the earth together. "Goodbye, Mommy," Ella whispered as they tipped the shovel, watching the soil fall. "I love you." The rest of the script will follow the same approach. Would you like me to continue paraphrasing the remaining sections? Thank you for your kindness. Before Johnny could respond, Agnes had already disappeared into the kitchen. The quiet house was soon filled with the sounds of cupboards being opened and shut, followed by the whistle of a kettle. When she returned, she carried a tray with 3 mismatched cups, 2 plastic and 1 chipped ceramic. With an evident concern for maintaining some semblance of hospitality, she handed a cup to Johnny. I'm afraid we don't have much to offer in terms of refreshments, Agnes said apologetically. But the tea is hot, at least. Johnny accepted the chipped cup with a grateful nod. It's perfect, Mrs. Bennet. Thank you. Agnes settled herself on the floor with them, completing their small circle. For a moment, an awkward silence enveloped the room, underscored by the sound of rain pattering against the windows. The weight of the situation seemed almost tangible. Ella, free from the social constraints of adulthood, was the first to break the silence. Her voice was filled with curiosity as she asked, Mr. Depp, how did you know my mommy? Did you meet her at the hospital? Johnny carefully set his teacup down, his expression thoughtful. Well, Ella, he began gently, I didn't know your mommy personally. But I came to learn about her, about you, and about your grandmother in quite an unexpected way. Agnes leaned in slightly, her curiosity evident. Yes, I've been wondering about that myself, she admitted. How did you become involved in our situation? And why go to such lengths for strangers? Taking a deep breath, Johnny's gaze shifted between Agnes and Ella. It all started a few weeks ago, he explained. I was visiting a friend in the hospital. He'd had a minor accident on a film set. While I was there, I overheard some staff talking in the corridor. They were discussing a patient, your mother, Sharon, and the difficult circumstances her family was facing. Ella's eyes widened. They were talking about us? Johnny nodded. Yes, they were. They seemed genuinely concerned about your mother's condition and the financial strain it was causing your family. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even after leaving the hospital. Agnes's brow furrowed. But isn't patient confidentiality a concern? You're absolutely right, Johnny agreed quickly. They shouldn't have been discussing it where others could hear. But I'm glad they did, because it gave me the chance to help. I reached out to the hospital administration to learn more about your situation while respecting privacy laws. And then, I decided to do what I could to ease your burden. He paused, his tone serious. I hope I haven't overstepped or caused any offense. I realize it might seem strange for a stranger to involve himself in such personal matters. Agnes shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. Offended? No, not at all. Your kindness has been overwhelming. I don't understand. Why would you do so much for people you've never even met? Johnny's gaze softened. Sometimes, Mrs. Bennet, we're given the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. When I learned about your struggles and Sharon's battle with cancer, I couldn't just walk away. I had the means to help, so I did. It really is as simple as that. Ella, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. Did you know my mommy had cancer? We didn't have enough money to make her better. The innocent question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Agnes drew a sharp breath, pain flashing across her face. Johnny silently sought permission to address Ella's question. Agnes nodded, gathering her strength. Ella, sweetheart, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Your mommy's story is a hard one. But I think it's time you knew everything. As Agnes prepared to reveal the full story of Sharon's battle with cancer, the rain intensified, creating a somber backdrop for the revelations unfolding within the Bennet home. As if nature itself acknowledged the shift in the Bennet family's fortunes, the storm that had brought them together was starting to clear, much like the dark cloud that had loomed over their lives for so long. Ella, her young face serious, turned to Johnny and asked in a small but steady voice, "What happens now?" Johnny responded with a gentle smile. Now, Ella, we begin the process of healing and rebuilding. Your mother's memory will live on through you and the treasures she left behind. I promise to do everything I can to help you and your grandmother move forward. Agnes, wiping away her tears, nodded gratefully. None of them could have foreseen the unexpected turn their conversation would soon take, or the remarkable way Sharon Bennet's legacy would extend beyond their family. As the weight of their discussion hung in the room, Ella suddenly stood, her young face showing a mixture of sorrow and determination. She approached the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked street. The storm had lessened to a gentle drizzle, mirroring the gradual easing of the emotional tempest in the Bennet home. Agnes, watching her granddaughter with concern, momentarily set aside her own grief, calling softly, "Ella, sweetheart, are you all right?" Ella turned to face the room, her gaze landing on Johnny. "Mr. Depp," she began, her voice small yet clear, "can I ask you something?" Johnny nodded encouragingly. "Of course, Ella. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath as if gathering her courage, Ella continued, "Our neighbor, Mr. Tillman, he's sick too, like Mommy was. Do you think you could help him too?" Agnes gasped softly, surprised by her granddaughter's request. "Oh, Ella," she murmured, touched by the child's thoughtfulness. Johnny's expression softened as he regarded Ella. "That's incredibly kind of you to think of someone else, even now," he said gently. "Can you tell me more about Mr. Tillman?" Ella nodded, her words spilling out in a rush. "He lives next door. He used to give me candy when I helped him with his garden, but now he's in a wheelchair, and he looks so tired. I overheard Grandma telling Mommy he has cancer too, but he can't afford the treatments." Agnes confirmed Ella's words with a nod. "Robert Tillman has been our neighbor for years, a kind man, always willing to lend a hand. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer about 6 months ago. His situation is, well, it's heartbreakingly similar to what Sharon faced." Johnny listened closely, his brow furrowed in thought. After a moment, he spoke with quiet determination. "Ella," he said, "your mother would be so proud of you for thinking of others, even during your own grief. And yes, I'd like to help Mr. Tillman if I can." Ella's face lit up with a glimmer of hope. "Really? You'll help him?" Johnny nodded, his smile gentle. "I'd certainly like to try. In fact," he said, pausing as if making a decision, "I think it would be a meaningful way to honor your mother's memory. What do you think?" Agnes reached out to take Ella's hand in hers. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said softly. "Sharon always believed in passing on kindness. This would be a beautiful continuation of her legacy." Ella nodded vigorously, a spark of life returning to her eyes. "Can we go see Mr. Tillman now? To tell him the good news?" Agnes hesitated, glancing out at the light rain still falling. "I'm not sure now is the best time, sweetheart. It's still raining, and Mr. Tillman might be resting." Johnny stood and brushed off his pants. "Actually," he said, "if you're comfortable with it, now might be the perfect time. Sometimes hope is the best medicine, and it sounds like Mr. Tillman could use some right now." Agnes considered for a moment before nodding. "You're right. If you're willing, Johnny, then let's go check on Robert."